Hello, my name is Nicholas Belomo, and I am the creator of the Escape From Tarkov Logo Animation that you see in front of you. A user by the name of Divinity asked for a tutorial video of sorts on how I created the animation, and while I won't necessarily be making a step-by-step tutorial on this, I can certainly show a behind-the-scenes look at how the animation was created and the various tricks that I had used. Inspiration for the animation came from the YouTuber elqx's DayZ Logo Animation, which I will link down below. The scene in front of you was created using Maya Autodesk 2015. However, the current version you are seeing is actually Maya Autodesk 2020. As you can see, the outliner is very horribly organized and named. If I recall correctly, I was having issues with rendering the scene, ultimately forcing me to import the scene into a new scene, which solved the issue. I would encourage any aspiring creators to be clear and concise with their naming scheme, as it helps not only you and your workflow if and when a project grows bigger, but it also helps anyone else who may view the file make sense of it. At the bottom right, you will see the various layers I have for groups of objects in the scene. This helps with working in the scene to toggle the visibility of certain objects or the ability to select them. With that said, this was a solo project, so I did not feel the need to clean up my outliner that much. But the one thing I will stress is to save constantly and with many iterations. The last thing you want is to have worked on something for hours and forget to save your work when the program crashes out of nowhere. This happens all the time in software, and personally, I save my files every 5 to 10 minutes automatically and create manual save iterations every few minutes or so. It's a good habit to get into. I want to start with the background, since I remember a comment asking how I got them. The trees, hills, city, and even the haze are all just images that I created in Krita, a free drawing/animation software. The city was traced from the Escape From Tarkov logo that Battlestate Games had made, of course with some creative liberties. As you can see, the letters, mountains, trees, and even some parts of the building obstruct the full city in the back, so while I tried to accurately trace the city silhouettes as best as I could, I also had to take some guesses for the rest of the obstructed portions. The same applies to some of the tree silhouettes. After finishing each drawing, I imported them into Maya as planes, since images are inherently flat, and I lined them up roughly to where they would be according to the original logo. The technique I used to move them is called parallax. This is where you have different objects, typically flat, at different depth ranges to where they move independently from one another, depending on how far or close the artist wants the viewer to perceive them. Simply put, objects that are close move faster and are closer to the camera, while objects that are far move slower and are further from the camera. You'll see this technique used a lot in side-scrolling games to give the illusion of things being far away when in reality they are practically layered right behind or even in front of the object ahead of them. The way I've done it in Maya is quite frankly a terrible method of doing so, at least in my case. It would have been far more productive to add the PNGs into a video editor and position them that way. Akin to the animated DayZ logo created by elqx, I wanted to have the silhouettes contrast against the brighter sky and background, hence why nearly all objects in the scene are colored black or have a very dark shade of gray to have the smaller details pop slightly. When building the scene, however, I did have the ground color be a bright pink to contrast greatly. Those purple markers you see are just the joints of the character models. Maya by default has them as purple, so let's not worry about those too much. Alright, I'm going to brighten up the ground so that all the objects in the scene can be viewed more easily. The keen-eyed among you will have noticed that my scene has an absurdly high face count. Long story short, it was due to the trees. Instead of using images to act as leaves, I had generated planes on each branch of the tree models. If you plan to generate an object like a tree several times in a given area, it would be better to make high-quality images for the leaves and place them appropriately on each branch rather than to generate some 1,000 or so leaves that you would have to essentially duplicate every single time for every tree. This saves RAM and speeds up renders vastly. The scene has a few buildings scattered about. I found their silhouettes to be very eye-catching, even if just shown briefly. As I slowly scrub through the timeline, you can see how all the objects slowly come into view. You can see some cargo boxes, a factory of sorts. Panning out more reveals the construction zone and later the city. Even some character models can be seen in their low poly fashion. The city's a bit funny in a way. It consists of a lot of copy and paste buildings with some objects inside them. On closer inspection, the buildings are more like cubes with holes punched out. There's a lack of detail placed on the interiors and even the bases of the building, and they don't even have real entrances. The camera would never spot these details due to how the scene is composed. Something else to note is how I got the buildings to have the yellow haze coming through the windows of the taller buildings. I chose the cheapest option of render times and just had a transparent yellow plane help with that illusion. You can see how the plane is just behind the windows and gives that extra yellow color from the original logo. The camera is animated very simply. The starting point looks up slightly in the beginning, pulls back to reveal more and more of the scene, passes through some objects for some visual flair, and then finally holes on the final sill of the logo. I won't get into too much detail, but this is accomplished by setting keyframes, starting one at the very beginning and then one at the very end. To help guide the camera along the path I intended, I made sure to place a few more keyframes in between the original two. At the end of the animation, I have the camera pan out completely to reveal the Escape From Tarkov logo, which is accurate enough to the original. One of the things I did at the very start of the project was perfect that final shot, meaning I had every object in view of the camera in that moment, and then built around before adding any other assets to the scene. A fair bit of time was spent in that final shot moving certain objects until I got the desired result. I found this to be the best way to do it. Also, those red arrows pointing diagonally are just the light direction in the scene. I'm sure many of you notice how not all of the black speckles on the logo are 100% accurate, and that's true. It would have taken me far longer to have done so, and instead I opted to get the larger or more important speckles to be more accurate than the lesser ones. And since I made this more for fun, I did not feel pressured into making it look 100% identical, again taking some creative liberties. And that said, I had traced the original logo with transparent cutouts to see the world behind it, much like the beginning of the video, though I would now do this in video editing software. After about 4 months of on and off work, mind you I was in high school at the time, I finished working on the scene and let it render out. So that is how I made the Escape From Tarkov logo animation. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully some will have found this to be informative, and will give an idea of how to do something like this on their own.